and by Jake Leacher, the chief scientist, chief exploration scientist in the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment just to thank LPI, not only for streaming this event, but for taking the bold step that they did 2 weeks ago to cancel LPSC. It's clear today that that was the right decision to make, and I hope that by making that decision early, all of you were able to make changes to your travel plans to accommodate this disruption. But I'm really happy that we at least had this opportunity to interact through this online streaming forum, and we look forward to providing you with information and hearing your questions. Doris Dow is available to take questions, and she'll be passing those along to me. And she's going to remind me here real quickly of her email address so I can read it out to you. I'd also want to, as we're getting started here, I want to give a quick shout out to the entire Planetary Science Division staff. Many of them are online listening right now today, and I'm sure they're all missing going to LPSC as much as you do. They're all passionate about what they do and what we do in planetary science, and they're working hard as we speak to make sure that all of our missions and all of our programs are functioning, even now as we've all moved into a almost entirely virtual working mode. And speaking of that, I would like to begin, if I can get my slides to go, there we go. By just taking a moment to address what's happening with COVID-19. First and foremost, the health and well-being of everyone in our science community and their families is our #1 priority. Not only the folks that work with us in the NASA family, but all of our scientists and engineers and anyone else, our collaborators in the community. We want everybody to be healthy and safe. So please take care of your own safety first. And I wanted to thank you all for your patience and understanding as everyone is trying to acclimate to the new world we're living in for the next few weeks or months. Those review panels have been moved to virtual, and we're trying to make other accommodations as well, trying to acknowledge that many of the folks in our community are having to telework as well, including their spouses and their kids are at home because schools are out. So we're working really hard to make sure we can accommodate those needs. We're also responding to the increased strain and disruptions. We're working already to extend deadlines where needed on proposals and other activities, trying to be responsive to those needs. And we're trying to be flexible and accommodate as things change going forward. As far as all of our missions right now, all of our operating missions are proceeding more or less as normal for right now. Everything is operating, and the plans are to try and keep everything going with Deep Space Network operations and the data facilities, data server facilities, everything to do with our operating missions. We're trying to keep that moving as normal as possible. For the missions development, we've been developing a plan to respond as necessary as the condition warrants. So some things that are close to delivery are getting high priority and are continuing to move forward, whereas other things that are earlier in their development cycles are going to more or less virtual only with very little hands-on activity. Most of those should feel very little impact from that, but we're monitoring that as we go as well. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the new folks that have joined the PSD leadership team over the last year since the last LPSC. In the fall, Erica Anson joined me as the new Deputy Director for Planetary Science Division. Eric has spent many years working in the Earth Science Division at NASA headquarters, where he was their Associate Director for Flight. I was very excited to bring him on board as my deputy back in the fall. Also, Joan Salute has actually taken on a new position called Associate Director for Flight, the same position that Eric had back in Earth Science. We now have that position in Planetary. Joan is leading that effort, essentially leading all of our flight programs except for Mars, which fall under the Mars Exploration Program. Just recently, we made a change in our director for the RNA program. Stephen Reinhardt had stepped in an acting role several months ago, and we just recently made a final selection, and Stephen will be taking on that role permanently as the director for the RNA programs. And we've also brought Megan Thompson on in a permanent capacity as the deputy director for the research programs. Megan, of course, has been doing a lot of work for RNA for many years in data analysis, so we're really happy to have her joining us as that deputy. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the current budget announcement that was just made recently for the 2021 proposed budget. This is the strongest budget we've seen in recent NASA history. In fact, really even in a long part of NASA's history since the Apollo era. It's a 12% over last year's request, and really quite impressive to support the agency's efforts to return to the moon, to go forward to the moon with the first woman and the next man, also in support of the Gateway and future exploration of Mars. And it supports key decadal priorities for us in planetary science, and most importantly, Mars sample return and Europa Clipper. The Science Mission Directorate's budget strategy, when we put this all together, is to work hand in hand with human exploration. So we are supporting the science that supports Artemis. We also are trying to implement a balanced and integrated science program, both within the divisions and across divisions, advancing compelling science priorities, science programs with the highest that are commensurate with the highest national priorities, and then we're executing innovative partnerships in order to achieve those science goals. So this is the President's proposed budget for FY21. You can see the column in the middle. To the far left is what was appropriated in 19. The next column is the President's request last year for fiscal 20. And then the third column is what was enacted back just before the holidays for fiscal year 20. Keep in mind that the 21 request is exactly that. It's a request and it's a proposal. Congress is going to consider what's in that FY21 column over the coming months. The information in the columns out to the right is notional. All of that is subject to a great deal of debate and change as we go forward. A couple of things I just want to draw your attention to in these columns are under the FY20 and 21 for planetary science. You'll see that the 21 request is a little bit lower than what we currently have in FY20. But again, this is a proposal, so we'll see how Congress deals with that as we go forward. There's still a lot of discussion to be had. One thing I do want to point out that's I think a strong positive of this budget, if you look under the planetary science research line for FY21, there is a substantial increase there between the request and what was requested last year. We're very pleased with that, and hopefully that will be retained as we go forward through the budget process. I mentioned that our individual budget was a little lower than what we received this year, and actually the top line across all of S&D is also lower than what was received this year. But this chart just shows the Science Mission Directorate budgets, where the blue is the budget request and the black is what was actually appropriated. And you can see that over the last several years we've been receiving a lot of very good support from Congress. And so at this point, I think we sit back and we'll have to see how all this plays out as Congress starts working on the FY21 budget. Within planetary science, just a couple of points I want to highlight here as far as the 21 budget. First off, the proposed budget is looking to suggest that Congress consider allowing Clipper to launch in 2024 on a commercial launch vehicle as opposed to the SLS as currently required by law. Also, I want to draw your attention to the bullet here about smallsat future opportunities. This is something that I feel strongly about. We had great response to our Simplex call the last go round, really great science ideas. And the current funding line we had was pretty restricted for the scale of missions we're trying to do in Simplex. So we're looking to grow that so that we have more capability in that line. We've also, I already mentioned the RNA increase. There's also, you'll notice in the president's budget, a proposal to begin study of an ice mapper for a Mars mission. This particular idea, this particular concept is to provide additional science at Mars through a radar system. It's intended to leverage significant international and commercial partnerships to do mapping of ice below the surface and near the surface of Mars, also providing additional communications infrastructure at Mars. And as I said, significantly leveraging international and commercial partnership, helping to prepare for future human exploration. I'd like to shift just a little bit. All of that has been talking about the proposed 21 budget. This chart actually shows the appropriations for Planetary Science Division from 2012 through our current appropriation in 2020. And you can see that we were pretty consistent between FY19 and FY20 in the total amount appropriated for Planetary Science Division. This is a good thing. In fact, the FY20 budget that was appropriated is about $1.3 million more than the president's proposed for FY20. But keep in mind that there were a lot of congressional interests that were included in the 20 budget. And after we've looked at all of those, the amount that's left over for the rest of Planetary is actually a bit short of what we would have liked to have seen. So we're in the process right now of having our operating plan. It's been submitted to Congress, and once we have that operating plan in place, we hope to make a few small adjustments to where the money gets spent. The total amount is set, but we hope to make a few adjustments. And once we have that information, we'll share that with the community as well. This is our current planetary fleet. I get really excited every time I show this chart. We've got 25 missions on this chart, 13 in operations, and 12 in development with launch dates nominally between now and 2026. It's a really exciting time to be a planetary scientist, and a really exciting time to have all of these missions on the plate as we go forward. Just a couple of things to draw your attention to here. I wanted to talk for a quick moment about Viper, which is shown in the Lunar window here, the Lunar little subsection. Viper is a mission that is building on a lot of the work that was done for Resource Prospector by the Human Exploration Mission Directorate. And that work, of course, was shut down a couple years ago. And so SMD took that activity and has been continuing efforts there and leveraging all the investments that were made in Resource Prospector. And so this is now the Viper mission. It's a Viper rover. There are some additional requirements that have been placed on this rover to survive the lunar night. But the activity is moving forward well. It's being managed by Ames Research Center, with the rover itself being built by Johnson Space Center. And they're coming along, doing very well, working towards their preliminary design review later in this year, with a planned launch in 2023. So I just wanted to mention that one briefly, because I think that's one of the newest things on this chart that you may or may not have seen before. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our opportunities in Planetary Science Division. First, a quick advertisement for our Planetary Science Advisory Committee. We are in the process of looking for some new members. We have some that are going to be rolling off, and we're looking to add some more. This is a great opportunity to really bring your expertise to a committee that provides direct input to Planetary Science Division. We're looking for self-nominations. The process is open until the end of March. The websites are the address is down below where you can email your information. As part of the package, the information is here. We need your name, phone number, email address, a resume, and a professional bio. So please send that information if you're interested. We'd love to hear from you. So a quick update on some of our announcements of opportunity. I've spoken about Simplex before, our three projects that are moving forward through phase AB right now. I get a lot of questions about when the next Simplex call will be. As I stated several months ago, after we made the Simplex selections, we really are trying to push the envelope on these. So we want to learn a little bit from what's been going on with these current missions. And so they're all currently planning to go through their confirmation through their PDR later in the summer and early fall. And so at this point, we do not expect to release the next Simplex call any earlier than September. And again, that's a no earlier than date. It may still slip some more, but that is the current best estimate of when we expect that AO to come out. For New Frontiers 5, we're still working to a schedule for a fall 2022 release of New Frontiers 5. And we just recently, for Discovery, made our Step 1 selections. Thomas Zurbuchen made 4 Phase A selections in Discovery. These are really exciting. They're all dynamic destinations, very exciting destinations. All 4 of them. There are 2 for Venus, the Da Vinci Plus, led by Jim Garvin at Goddard Space Flight Center, IVO, which is the Io Volcano Observatory, led by Alfred McEwen, University of Arizona, Veritas, a Venus Orbiter mission, led by Sue Smrekar at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Trident, mission to Triton, to fly by Triton, mission led by Louise Proctor at LPI. And I have to say that one of the things that gets me most excited about all 4 of these potential missions is that no matter what combination of missions are selected, we are going to be expanding the breadth and diversity of the science that we're conducting in the solar system. So I'm really, really excited about all 4 of these concepts moving forward. You'll notice that Thomas selected 4 missions for Phase A. In the AO, we had mentioned the possibility of selecting up to 5. And I wanted to speak about that for just a moment. We are at the moment looking at budget considerations going forward, and everyone knows I want to pick 2 missions. Ultimately out of this is probably as much or more than anyone, but there are budget realities. And so we're looking at that. And at this point, it's not absolutely clear we'll be able to select 2. So I didn't want to pick 5 for, have Thomas pick 5 for Phase A if there was a potential that we wouldn't be able to select 2. But at the same time, I still really want to select 2. And so we wanted to make sure we had a good selection, a good group there, a good suite of missions to choose from going forward. And so this chart here is one that I wanted to just chat about for a minute. And this starts to speak to why there are some budget realities regarding Discovery missions. And part of this gets back to the Decadal survey was recommended Discovery launches every 2 years. That recommendation came 10 years ago, back when the Discovery cap was around $450 million, and included everything, launch vehicles, Phase E, included everything. And so you can see towards the left end of this chart, where the blue is the A to D costs, orange is Phase E, green is launch vehicle. These missions, at that time, 10, 15, 20 years ago, were all contained within that smaller cost cap. And then what you see between Grail and Insight is that the launch vehicle costs were removed from the cost cap, but the cost cap wasn't reduced by that amount. The PIs were still allowed to propose up to the same amount, which allowed more science to be included in the proposed missions. That was the right thing to do. The launch vehicles had costs that were out of the PI's control, so I still believe that was the right thing to do. And then again, between Insight and Lucy and Psyche, Phase E was then removed from the cost cap, which again then allowed more science to be fit into the Discovery line, the discovery missions. I still believe those are all the right decisions to make. I think leveling the playing field between missions with short phase E and long phase E is the right thing to do. And we've got some great missions to show that wouldn't have been able to fit within the other kind of constraints from before. But the reality is that as you look at Lucy and Psyche, we now have discovery missions that are getting pretty close to $1 billion in their total life cycle cost. And so in thinking about how frequently we want to launch discovery missions, we have to realize that something's got to give. We can either increase the amount of money for each mission and spread them out, or we can reduce the cost and launch them more frequently. So this is just something that I'd like to put into the community for some discussion as we're going into Decadal survey right now. I think this is going to be an important topic for us all to be considering as we try to think about the sizes of missions and the cadences that we'd like to see launched as we go forward. Looking ahead, I want to talk about a couple of things here. I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about our assessment groups or analysis groups, the AGs. Hopefully, most people in our community are actively involved in at least one of our AGs. I know many people are involved in multiple AGs. These are really important community-based groups that are able to pull together their individual science constituencies to best understand the real problems and questions that need to be answered, the scientific issues that are out there that need to be addressed. And I really appreciate all the work that gets done by the AGs. Several years ago, the AG chairs who used to serve on the Planetary Science Subcommittee were essentially taken out of that advisory committee structure as the structure was kind of reorganized. And I felt that the AGs have kind of, they're still been out there, they're still doing great work, but we've kind of lost the way to really formally get feedback from those AGs. And so I wanted to work to formalize that a little more. And so we're working right now with the community and with the individual AGs, trying to make, number one, the terms of reference more consistent so that each of the AGs are being dealt with the same way, and they still have some flexibility to reflect the needs of their individual communities, but that we have some consistency in how they interact with headquarters. We're also trying to find a way to provide more consistent funding to support the AG chairs. It's a lot of work to organize a steering committee and to prepare for meetings and all the other workshops and activities that the AGs put together. So we're trying to provide a way that's consistent, again, across all of the AGs to provide that support for the chairs and for the other activities that they conduct. And we're also trying to, as I said at the beginning, provide a clear path for feedback so that the AGs can not only provide information directly to Planetary Science Division, but also through the Planetary Advisory Committee. So there's a formal mechanism for bringing feedback to headquarters. We've been working on this really hard. All of the AG liaisons at headquarters have been getting together weekly or bi-weekly to discuss this and to come up with the format for this. And we hope to have the new kind of structure in place by June. For you as the community, hopefully this will be completely transparent to you, but hopefully it will also be a welcome change to the AG chairs and those steering committees. So look for that to come in the near future. One of the big things, of course, this year is we're all gearing up and planning for the Decadal survey. I encourage you all to go check the National Academy's website that's given here. There's lots of good information there on the Decadal survey. The white paper process is starting to get underway. I'm hopeful that the website to receive all of the white papers will be open soon, hopefully by the end of March, but certainly in the next few weeks. And I encourage you all, I know you've all been working already to start putting together your white papers and collaborating with others in the community on those white papers. The AGs each have websites where they're trying to bring members of the community together. And LPI also has a website for folks to try and connect with other like-minded individuals to put together the white papers. Information on specifications for those white papers can be found also on the Academy's website. We had several, we thought, really good activities planned associated around the Decadal survey that were going to take place at LPSC. So without LPSC here, we're trying to find other ways to make these happen. One of these was an early career workshop. It was a 2-hour event to be held on Sunday this last week to help involve and engage the early career community. You know, what is a decadal survey and how can I get involved? That activity is being postponed. We're in the process of trying to identify when and how we're going to do that, so stay tuned. We have, of course, planetary mission concepts. We have 11 concepts that are under study right now, and there was to be an all-day status workshop also on Sunday. We're working on postponing that. Given the situation, it may likely be virtual, but we're looking at something in about the late April or perhaps a little beyond that. But again, another opportunity for the community to hear what those different concepts are, to provide your input and engage in conversation about what those concepts look like as they begin writing up their reports to provide to the Decadal survey. And then there was also to be an LPSC town hall led by the National Academies to talk about the Decadal survey process. We held that on Monday of this week, so I hope that some of you got to tune in to that earlier this week. This is the notional timeline for the survey, some dates and things you can put in your mind for where we're going here. 2019 shows some of the things that we did leading up to the end of the year. Just in January of this year, NASA and the National Academies, and actually NSF as well, all came to agreement on the statement of task. I encourage you to go look at the National Academy's website. The full statement of task is posted there along with the guidelines and considerations. There's lots of information there, so I encourage you to go look at that. That's been agreed to, and now that that's agreed to, we're in the process of completing the procurement activity, which will get funding to the academies to allow the whole survey to get kicked off. As I already mentioned, white papers submission should begin soon. Hopefully the chair will also be announced soon. We expect the white papers to be due no earlier than late May, but it may be a little later in the summer. It's dependent on when the steering committee has their first meeting, so stay tuned for more details there. Then the schedule going forward would be to have a draft of the report in the fall of 2021, aiming to have the final report done in the spring of 2020. There have been a lot of questions about what constitutes conflict of interest and who in the community, if you're working on white papers, are you allowed to serve on the Decadal survey panel? Michael New and Colleen Hartman and National Academies worked very, very hard to come up with this statement. And there was a lot of back and forth, and we really were trying to be as inclusive as we possibly could of our scientific community for participation on the panel. But ultimately, this is the statement, the conflict of interest statement that we were able to come to agreement on. And there are some limitations, but these are intended to preserve the integrity of the process itself. National Academies puts a lot of effort into making sure that the reports that come out have integrity. And so they are looking for the nominations and self-nominations. Those opportunities will become open very soon as well. We're looking for scientific and technical expertise as the objective.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, Lori.
Yes.
Hey, I think Doris was about to interrupt too. Sorry. There's somebody that we're hearing a lot of background noise that's really starting to muffle you. So if everyone could mute their mics, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. I was talking about nominees for the Decadal survey. Need to be broad thinkers and open-minded and able to participate preferably in person. Of course, that may be subject to change considering where we are. Let's see where things are this summer. These are the additional considerations. Authors of science-focused white papers prepared for the survey are eligible to serve on any of the panels, including the steering group. If you're the first author on a mission-focused white paper that's prepared for the survey, those first authors will not be allowed to serve on the steering group or any panel that's considering that mission, but are allowed to serve on any other panels as part of the survey. Further, the principal investigators of the PMCSs, the NASA-funded Decadal missions concept studies, again, have similar constraints as far as not being allowed to serve on the steering committee or the panels considering that mission, but they can serve on any of the other panels. And as I said, this was essentially where we come to agreement on where we are trying to be as inclusive as possible of our community. Last thing I wanted to talk about is our efforts within Science Mission Directorate to help prepare the next generation of principal investigators that are going to be leading the missions going into the future. This is an activity that was kicked off in November called PI Launchpad. We held the first PI Launchpad in Tucson, Arizona. It was competitive to take part in this. It was a very competitive process. Ultimately, 40 participants, approximately 40 were selected. I believe that approximately half of those were from planetary science community, so we're very proud of our participation. It was, from all accounts, extremely successful, and we hope to launch the next PI Launchpad in the summer. We'll see how things progress right now, but please stay tuned for that if this is something you're interested in. We certainly hope to engage more of the community. With that, I am going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it over to Steve and then to Jake, and we'll all take questions afterward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori. All right, so I am the Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration. I believe a lot of you know me last time I spoke at LPSC, and as Lori mentioned in the beginning here, was all three of us were looking forward to conducting this in person, of course. But we've got a good backup plan here, and I see questions are coming in, so I guess we'll hit those questions after I finish, and Jake has a couple of slides as well at the end. So next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. So I wanted to give you a little update. Last time I spoke to you, my office was very lean. I believe there were maybe 3 of us at the time, a program scientist, a program exec, and me. Since then, we've put together more of a structure to my office, and I'll draw your attention to the name change. Based on the activities that my office is involved with, we have now identified the office as the Exploration Science Strategy and Integration Office, because the 2 key things we do is develop the science strategy, not only in SMD and across the divisions, but also with our cross-directorate colleagues such as Jake and our Space Technology Mission Directorate colleagues. And then we do the integration function, working again across the SMD science divisions with the mission directorates, but also with our international partners and other agencies as well that are interested in working with us, particularly in the Lunar Discovery and Exploration Program. And so you'll see below the blue box that says LDEP, those are the various elements that are included in the LDEP program. Of particular interest, of course, is CLPS on the far left, then the lunar instrument development to develop those instruments that will fly on the CLPS missions. Small sats, CubeSats. We're excited about Trailblazer that I'll talk about here in a little bit. We released an RFI to gain insight into potential lunar surface science mobility systems that we may be able to pursue in the future. Viper, Lori described, is under development and management by Planetary. The Viper review team, which is an independent review team, remains organized and funded under my office. And then long duration lunar rover investments we're looking at, the LRO mission operations is under my office, and then the Apollo Next Generation Sample Analysis as well. The orange boxes above LDEP are the activities that are above and beyond LDEP. I won't go into detail now to preserve some time for Jake and Q&A, But the takeaway there is we have a lot of engagement with the mission directorates and other international and government agencies as well, working through policies, working groups and so forth that really bring that integration part of the office together. Next slide. So talking about CLPS, last I spoke to you, we had 9 providers in the CLPS pool. The circles show the 5 additional companies that we on-ramped late November, early December of last year. Sierra Nevada Corporation, SpaceX, Tyvak, Blue Origin, and Ceres Robotics. And that on-ramp brought these companies on to provide enhanced lander capabilities to really increase the variability and diversity of the providers in the CLPS pool. Viper is certainly one that we're going to be flying on a future CLPS mission. In fact, the task order is out and proposals are due back from our providers in mid-April. So we'll be looking to award that delivery task order in late May, early part of June. This is an update to our CLPS pool, and so now we have 14 providers that can bid on our task orders. Next slide. So here's a quick summary of where we're at with the procurements. Task order 2 is the already awarded delivery task order that Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines won, and they are developing their lander systems now. And you'll see in parens that Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines will be taking the NASA-provided lunar payloads and some human exploration operations and space technology mission directorate technology demonstration payloads. I'll show that on the next slide. Task order 19C, we're getting close to awarding, and that will be the next delivery to take a set of the lunar surface instrument and technology payload instruments that are in development now. They'll also be taking some duplicate NASA-provided lunar payloads that we've asked to be developed in line with the first elements up above. I mentioned the Viper task order that we'll be awarding here soon. And then the second task order that will be released this year for what I'll call the more standard commercial services will be released roughly in the June-July timeframe. So next slide. So this is the delivery manifests, how they exist for Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines. Again, I won't go into detail here, but you'll see by the color code that the light green indicate the science instruments that are flying on each of these CLPS providers. The orangish yellow box are the technology demonstration payloads. Then the blue box are the ones that have really a good cross section between science, technology, and exploration goals. So you'll see the 1 on the Astrobotics lander and 2 on the Intuitive Machines. And then the maroon or red box is what the Human Exploration and Space Technology Mission Directorate folks are very interested in flying, that involve the navigation Doppler LiDAR, which will help inform future lander designs, including the human lander system. And then over there on the Intuitive Machines, the radio frequency mass gauge is something that we've asked to be put into the propulsion system at Intuitive Machines to enable us to get the propulsion data. And this, in fact, will be our first data buy with our CLPS providers, because Intuitive Machines has a LOX methane propulsion system, and our Space Technology Mission Directorate colleagues are very interested in gaining more insight into that system. Next slide. So our next instrument call is called PRISM. I think a lot of you have probably been informed of this through Dr. Brad Bailey and Dr. Ben Bussey. Dr. Sarah Noble have talked about this in various forums. PRISM stands for Payloads and Research Investigations on the Surface of the Moon. This is a 2-stage approach that we are taking, where we will release an RFI to gain interest from the community of what type of instruments they would like to fly to the lunar surface. And this isn't just planetary science, this really goes across all the science divisions. And then the stage 2 part of this will be NRA solicitations. That'll state the location for each delivery. Once we have that catalog of instruments and ideas from the RFI, we'll be able to basically start forming up where the community would like to go, and we expect many different locations. So what we want to do is have the PIs propose science that are optimized for those locations. And so we'll go out with stage 2 solicitations to go to the various locations and then build the manifest for those future CLPS missions. The initial priority, again, is to solicit suites of instruments that can work together, but we'll certainly welcome high-value location-agnostic instruments. And as I mentioned, these PRISM instruments will feed the manifests from 2023 onwards. So our intent here was to continue to build the pipeline of instruments to fly on the CLPS missions to maintain the cadence of 2 deliveries per year. And we do expect to have participating scientist programs for each of these flights. Lori and I will work together on how best to put those participating scientist programs out for people to propose to. And then the future PRISM calls will ask for destination agnostic and standalone instruments as well, because what we want to do is not just put suites of instruments together. We know there are some instruments that would operate by themselves, or even a network of instruments such as seismometers that we would like to put out on multiple landers to get multiple data points. Next slide. And click one more time. Thank you. So you probably saw in the news just recently that we selected the first science instruments to be going on Gateway in the early part of the Gateway buildup. And we're excited about this, that science is going with Gateway from the very beginning. I won't go into a lot of details with the words here, but basically there are 2 packages. One that is being led by our heliophysics division, and the other being provided by our European Space Agency colleagues. And the major science objectives here really is to provide space weather and radiation measurements in a beyond low Earth orbit environment. And certainly these long-term objectives include predictive techniques that can be used for protection of our human explorers going beyond LEO. We're going to need to better understand the environment in the near rectilinear halo orbit that Gateway will be flying in. We need to understand the environment on the surface of the moon, but then looking longer term, we need to understand the environment going to Mars and at Mars to protect our crews from the various space weather hazards that we know exist today. What's also interesting is we're going to be flying through the Earth's radiation belt, so we'll be gaining more insight into the environment. We've gained a lot of information from the Van Allen probes. And of course, we were sorry to see that that had to be decommissioned because basically they ran out of fuel, but provided a significant science data for many years. So now we're going to be gaining more information beyond the radiation belts as we embark on deep space exploration with humans. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about the strategy here, and the science strategy to the moon, we're working very closely with Jake and the human exploration folks. I'm stating a lot of what you already know, but the moon really is a cornerstone for solar system science. It's a natural laboratory to study planetary processes and evolution. And really it's a new platform from which we can observe the universe. There's a lot of interest in putting, for instance, radio array telescopes on the far side of the moon where it's radio quiet, where we can observe the universe. We want to understand the volatile cycles on the moon, study the impact history, because that will tell us really more about the Earth because of the Earth-Moon system evolving at the same time. And certainly the moon is a record of the ancient sun. Basically, we would be able to better understand how the sun was emanating high energy particles at that time. As we dig into the regolith and study that, we'll have a better idea of what the ancient sun was like millions of years ago. We're conducting scientific exploration with humans and robotics together. In fact, I'll draw your attention to the very last bullet. We had a joint SMD, HEO, STMD workshop scheduled for the end of April in Denver to start planning the science activities that our human explorers will do on the surface of the moon, starting with the 2024 mission. Unfortunately, we had to postpone that, of course, just like everything else with the coronavirus. But we are looking at potentially holding virtual town halls such as this, or subgroup meetings, to keep moving those efforts forward, because we really do need to start investing in the science instruments tools, particularly for the first human mission in 2024. And next slide. I think, yeah, my portion's done, and I'll turn it over to Jake Bleacher to give us an overview from the Artemis perspective. Jake. And Jake, I think your mic is muted.
Can you hear me now? There
Yes.
we go. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Hot mic now. All right. So I just wanted to say thanks to Lori and Steve for the opportunity to participate again in this panel. It's a good opportunity to communicate with everyone what's going on inside human exploration. And I think one of the main messages that Steve's already given a little bit here is that as we look forward to human exploration moving beyond low Earth orbit, science and exploration really go hand in hand moving forward. And so we'll be going on to the moon. And at the moon, we'll be conducting scientific research, much of it which will give us the foundational data that helps us understand how to survive beyond low Earth orbit and prepare for and eventually go on to send humans to explore Mars. Next slide, please. And so this activity really is multi-directorate, and it really is an exciting time to be conducting this research. We talk about Artemis. Artemis is the program that we're setting up to conduct the lunar exploration. And we talk about phase 1 and phase 2. In general, just so we're all on the same page, in our mind, phase 1 is referring to everything we need to do to get ready for that first human landing on the moon. Beyond that, we call that phase 2. That's sustainable presence on the lunar surface and preparing for and learning how to move onward to explore Mars. An important point, I think, especially for this community to understand, is that the exploration of the moon is not starting today. We follow in the footsteps of many missions, Apollo, literally their footsteps. But up in the top left corner there, you see the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. I've heard many of my colleagues say, you know, the efforts that are underway now started a little over 10 years ago as we started collecting the reconnaissance data that's going to help us decide where to send humans and what they're going to do when they get there. Working hand in hand with SMD, we have a whole series of missions intended to test out the human-rated vehicles that will get our humans to the surface, as well as landing vehicles on the surface of the moon in prep for when the crew will join them there. And so Steve talked about the CLPS missions, the CLPS landings that will start delivering payloads in the polar region as well as elsewhere around the moon. Again, starting to collect that data that helps us understand the lunar environment. And then human exploration and Space Technology Mission Director will be looking into using CLPS as well to get some of the hardware there that we need to support the crew for that first mission. Meanwhile, we'll be testing out through Artemis 1 and 2, the Orion spacecraft. That will be the lifeboat for our crew that gets us out into lunar orbits from which we can send them down to the surface of the moon. At the same time, we'll be building up the gateway through several key launches, getting the key elements up there that are needed to enable us to move forward and support that sustained human presence on the lunar surface. So this is, we refer to this as a swoosh chart. We all tend to show it from time to time, and it really tries to tie together all the different things that are going on. Next slide, please. I just wanted to show this slide quickly. It shows the gateway as well as the human landing system. So the gateway, in order to prepare for our human landings, is composed of a power and propulsion element, as well as a habitat and logistics outpost, which is referred to as the halo. So that'll be the habitable environment where our crew members will stay when they go up to the gateway in orbit around the moon. For each crewed mission, we'll send a logistics module as well, just like we send logistics up to the International Space Station, often separate from the crew members who are launched up there. In this slide, we show the human landing system as well as the Orion and the European Service Module docked with the gateway. So it really shows that as we move into a sustainable presence at the moon, we'll have opportunities for this aggregation point in orbit around the moon. That not only helps us support sustained presence at the moon, but it also helps us prepare for and collect the data we need to learn how to conduct the transfer onto Mars and getting our crews over to Mars. Next slide, please. As many of you are well aware, the human landing system call went out end of last year, and we're in the review process for that now. And I know many of you have expressed to us a desire to know when that announcement's going to come out, and I'll continue to say the same thing. We're getting closer. We haven't quite made that announcement yet, but it turns out when you're trying to put in contracts in place that are going to carry your friends to lunar orbit and down to the surface of the moon, you want to get it right. So we're making sure we get that right. We're taking our time to make sure we get that right with our commercial partners. Ultimately, this process is initially our American-led establishment of a strategic presence around the moon, but ultimately it offers an unbound potential for partnership and collaboration as we explore the moon, prepare for exploring Mars. This slide here just gives us a quick sampling of some of the key capabilities that we're looking at to help explore the moon, again, and think about as we move forward into Mars exploration. Steve mentioned SMD put out a call for some mobility capabilities on the lunar surface. That was a joint request for information, RFI, with HEOMD. We put out a separate call, but jointly with SMD, to look at an unpressurized roving vehicle. We call it the Lunar Terrain Vehicle, LTV. That call went out a few weeks ago, and we got over 30 responses back from commercial and also university areas. And so we're in the process of reviewing those reports and looking at that for some novel new ideas that might help us explore the lunar surface, and understanding what capabilities that the commercial sector can bring forward to us. With respect to suits, we have an in-house build to meet our initial landing on the lunar surface, but that's likely also to be competed in the commercial realm as well, as we think about what do we need those suits to do for our sustained longer-term presence on the moon. Again, we have the systems that are being explored now for maintaining our orbit and for the lunar outpost, the gateway, as well as the systems that will take us to the surface and bring crew member back up to orbit. What I think is really important to highlight here, though, is the coordination that's now going on between the directorates. And I think both Lori and Steve mentioned interactions with human exploration. I also want to call out our Space Technology Mission Directorate. In addition to the collaborations we have between SMD and HEOMD, working closely with STMD on their Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium, which they newly developed, which is a chance to engage the public community, thinking about what technologies are we going to need in place on the lunar surface to support these grand endeavors that we're talking about here. And again, one of the really key places I think we're really collaborating is we're trying to set up and finalize what we'll call the objectives for Artemis, the science objectives for Artemis. And we really are leaning on our Science Mission Directorate colleagues, Steve heavily there to help us on that. And so as SMD pulls that information together, that's the type of goals that we can adopt within the overall Artemis program to meet with our robotic and human exploration of the lunar surface. And I just want to call out again, Steve called it out, but we were planning the Lunar Surface Science Workshop at the end of April, and for obvious reasons, that's not going to be a meeting that we can attend physically, but we do want to find ways to use examples like this meeting right now to start to virtually engage the external NASA community, so we can really start to build this strategy for exploring the moon, learning from lunar orbit, how to prepare for going onto Mars. And so I think that's my last slide, and I'll join with Lori and Steve and answer any questions that the community might have.
Great. Thank you, Jake. I've got a couple of announcements for folks that are online. First, if you're watching the video and you're experiencing a blurry video, check the HD button on the bottom right of the video box. I'm told that if you check that and go to HD, it should hopefully make it a little clearer. And then also just to remind folks that if you want to send your questions, send them to Doris Dow. Her email is Doris, DORIS.Dow, DAOU, @nasa.gov. And we've got quite a few questions here already. So we'll start with some of these. And if it's okay with Steve and Jake, I'll just read them out and I'll try to moderate. Maybe we'll start with some here. I've got several for Steve. Let's see. Let's start with some of these here about will there be a participating scientist call for the existing CLPS missions for ABM-1 and for Gateway?
So thank you, Lori. No, we don't have a plan to do participating scientist programs for the first two. The main reason for that is these first two, we wanted to jumpstart as soon as we could. And I started out with what I'd call somewhat of a limited budget in FY19 to do just that, to get, we selected 12 instruments to the NASA provided lunar payloads to go into development and to fund 2 of our CLPS providers. So we didn't really have much wiggle room when it came to budget. And most of these are near ready to fly instruments, some of which may even be engineering test units or prototypes. So we didn't consider it being a good opportunity to do the program, participating scientist program for those 2. Now we are in discussions to see when we want to bring those on. We may look at the LCIP instruments as a possibility, but we just haven't really converged on an answer for that yet. Certainly for PRISM we will, and I think I briefed that in my charts, but we are taking a look at the 19C and D LCIP instruments to see if that would be of value to the community as well.
Okay, and then there's another question here about the joint SMD, HOEMD, SDMD workshop, a question about how to participate in that. Maybe this is for both Steve and Jake. I know you both said that probably going to be postponed and maybe a different format, but how do folks find out how to participate?
So Jake, I guess I'll take that first if you want to amplify anything, because I know you've been involved deeply with the details with Ben Bussey. But we did put out a call to the community for abstracts. And we received, if I'm not mistaken, over 170 abstracts from across the science community. And so that call is closed and we're focusing on those abstracts. And that's what we were using to develop the workshop. It was going to be a 3-day workshop. So stay tuned. Once we start conducting those hopefully virtual subgroup meetings, and eventually we're going to come to a time where we get on the other side of the virus here and hopefully can do a face-to-face sometime in the late summer, early fall, if everything goes well. Then we'll have more to report out. But right now, since we had that call and we had such a robust response with the abstracts, right now that's where we're at. We're not looking for any more input. Jake, do you want to amplify that?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, our organizing committee is going to be meeting shortly to discuss the best path forward. The abstracts that were submitted were great contributions. I think we're looking into options to go ahead and still put those online the same way that we would have had the meeting physically occurred at the end of April. And then to build from that. You know, these are unfortunate circumstances. We can't change them, but we don't want to just cancel the meeting, and we also don't want to just take it as it was proposed here and move it to a later date. So we want to look for pathways to move forward, again, engage virtually as we can, and so that when we get to a time when we can have another meeting, we're building on what we have been able to get done. So I think stay tuned, and we will release announcements as to virtual opportunities or other opportunities as we discuss that with our organizing committee.
Okay, and Jake, while you're on here, you know, Steve spoke to the possibilities of participating scientist programs on some of his activities, but there was also a follow-on here about Gateway. Do you know if there's any opportunity for a PSP associated with Gateway Science?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess one thing, I didn't go into a lot of detail about the payloads that were announced for early flight with Gateway. When I talk about Gateway, one of the complexities that I'd like everyone to understand is that when our timeline was moved to a 2024 landing, we basically put us in a position with Gateway where we had to develop research objectives at the same time as trying to identify payloads, at the same time as we're developing the spacecraft itself. And so we recognize that this is not the nominal way that we approach selecting and funding payloads. And we had to work very closely with our international partners to identify what we thought were the highest priority measurements to be made early on at Gateway, understanding that Gateway is a platform to both support exploration of the moon as well as prepare for traveling onto Mars and exploring Mars. So working with the international science community, we evaluated and identified high value in the orbit that Gateway's in, a near rectilinear halo orbit. Is there anything that you can bring to the table for us to fly here? And so because of the very compressed timeline that HEO was under, we recognized that wasn't the traditional pathway to identify payloads. However, we have identified that partnership, including science team membership across the supporting agencies, was of high value. And so at the moment, I can't say exactly how we're going to go about approaching that, but I think just like everything else that we're doing right now, we're moving extremely fast, and we are looking to SMD in a collaborative mode to try and identify ways to make those opportunities available. So again, stay tuned, and just please understand we're moving quick, and we're trying to create the opportunity for these chances in the future for people to participate.
Great, thanks, Jake. All right, how about I take a couple, and then we'll throw a couple back to you guys. And for folks online, I know there's some budget questions here, and I'll get to those in a minute, but I'm going to address some of these other ones first. Here's one that says, given the current situation, is Mars 2020 expected to be launched on time? And I'm glad you asked that question. This is something that's been right on the forefront of everybody's mind, both the Mars 2020 project and at headquarters. We've put together a framework, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, with which to look at each of the missions and at what points we want to continue working on them. And Mars 2020 is one of only two missions that within SMD that is the very highest priority, that we are placing the launch, the scheduled launch as a high priority, that we're going to ensure that we meet that launch window in July. In so doing that, we're also making sure that our personnel are healthy and safe. We're taking every precaution to make sure that those individuals that are working on Mars 2020 are going to work in conditions and have an environment where they're able to stay safe. But we're continuing the activities that are the integration and test activities that are going on at Kennedy Space Center. We have full support from Kennedy, full support from JPL and NASA headquarters, and from Department of Energy as well, for making sure we get the MMRTG delivered to Kennedy and installed. So as of right now, And even if we go to a next stage of alert, Mars 2020 is moving forward on schedule, and everything is so far very well on track. So stay tuned for that. But at this point, we don't see any impact due to the current situation. As I said, we are making sure that all of our personnel that are working on Mars 2020 are taking all precautions and make sure that their safety is number one. So we are making sure that we do that as well. I have a couple questions in here about Decadal survey that I'd like to address quickly. There is a question here about regarding serving on Decadal survey committee, can I clarify what is meant by an active proponent of a specific project? And I think what this is referring to, in my interpretation, is, for example, someone who may have proposed a certain idea, for example, a New Frontiers concept previously, might be seen as someone who would be, publicly acknowledged as someone who's an active proponent for a specific type of project, although they may not have been a PI on one of the current mission concept studies and may or may not be a first author on a white paper. Some in the community may feel that they have a vested interest in a particular concept. That being said, that will all be discussed and assessed by the national academies as they're making their selections for the panels. But in my interpretation, that's what that statement means. There was also another question in here about the white papers. It says, looking at the ag websites, the count for provisional white papers currently exceeds 200. Would I like to encourage authors to converge and merge their papers to make the National Academy's review task more tractable? So in response to that, I just want to note that every single white paper is important. I can guarantee you, as someone who's been on the Decadal survey in the past, that the panel takes those white papers very seriously. They read every single one. And so whether a paper has one co-signer or 200 co-signers, they're all important and they all have ideas that are carefully considered. That being said, you can imagine if you were a member on the panel, you have a limited amount of energy to read those papers. And so to the extent that it's possible to bring members of the community together that have like-minded ideas and can come together with a paper with multiple co-signers, think about the energy of your panel members and trying to make sure that they have the bandwidth to consider everything that we want to submit. But as I said, every single white paper is important, so I don't want to in any way artificially limit the number of papers that get submitted. I think that was the only other Decadal one for now. Let's come back to Steve. There was a good question here about PRISM. It says that the PRISM step 1 is an RFI to create a catalog, but then you also say that selected PRISM instruments will feed future CLPS missions. And the question is, will individual instruments be funded from the PRISM step 1 call, or will only PI-led payloads in PRISM step 2 be funded for development?
Thank you, Lori. That's a good question. No, we're looking for individual instruments as well. And I apologize if the wording was a little confusing. We are looking for suites of instruments so that we can do more science on each of the deliveries that we can do, but understanding that there are instruments that operate solely by themselves are of great interest as well. So we welcome single instrument proposals as well.
Great. All right, let's come back to some of these budget questions. So here's a question here, says, I'm super pleased that this is one of the strongest budgets in NASA's history, but I'd like to know more about the thinking behind decisions to fund a new Mars mission not advocated for by the community. For example, IceMapper, while 2 current Mars missions that got very highly reviewed in the recent extended mission proposal, Odyssey and Curiosity, have major budget cuts which seriously affect their ability to complete the activities in their extended mission proposal. And then essentially saying Odyssey appears to be effectively canceled and Curiosity cut in 21 and 22. So I do want to address this one head on. Again, as I said in the beginning, please keep in mind those are proposed budgets. And the exercise that we go through to work with OMB to put those together, We pull and try and fit things as best we can inside the budgets that we have available. As you noted, Odyssey and Curiosity both performed very well in the extended mission senior review. They've done very well. And certainly we have desire to keep them going as long as possible. As I said, the budget that we have now is a proposal, and we're working to try and find a way to keep all of our operating missions that are successful, keep them all going as long as possible. So at this point, we are, with the budget as it looks, with Odyssey, the funding that's there, we do have to start thinking about what it would take to close it down, but we're trying to move that at a pace that would allow us flexibility should the case arise that we're able to secure additional funding to keep it going. So I do understand the value of the existing missions. We certainly want to keep them all going. I'll talk just a moment about Ice Mapper. As I alluded to earlier, this is a mission that right now in the proposed budget is a study. It is a study to look at a potential concept that would contribute to science at Mars with understanding the distribution and concentration of ice in the Martian regolith. In addition to that, and to do that, actually, to do that mapping of the ice, as again, leverage international partnerships. We have the potential for a collaboration with Canada and a Canadian synthetic aperture radar. And so that's what provides, in some sense, this opportunity. And again, the idea would be to study a concept that would significantly leverage those international, potentially even commercial partnerships to not only do the science, but also provide additional communications infrastructure that's going to be needed in the coming decade once we start flying Mars sample return, and then also to start preparations, gathering the needed data as we start to think about going forward with human exploration in the next decade. So I think hopefully that addresses that question. There was another question that was very similar to that one, so hopefully that answers both of those. There was a question, this is a simple one. Let us know where we could download the slides from this week's virtual town halls. These can be found on the NASA Solar System website. It's science.nasa.gov/solar-system/documents. So all of the slides are going to be posted there. You can find them from all of the town halls that have happened this week. Let's see, here's a question. For planning purposes, can you give a ballpark target cost cap for the next simplex opportunity, knowing that it is dependent on the budget? Plus or minus 25 million would be helpful. As of today, looking forward, we don't foresee changing the cost cap. The cost cap that was in the last round of simplex was 55 million. And we currently are targeting that same general ballpark for a cost cap for simplex. We were at the time when that call went out the last time, we're not totally confident what kind of science we would get back within that cost cap, but we're really impressed with the quality of the science and the level of maturity of the designs that came in. And so we're really, as I said, impressed with the level of science that could be fit into that $55 million cost cap. So for now, the expectation is that it would remain the same. Again, these are questions that going into the next decadal survey are things that I really encourage the survey to consider. What is the appropriate scope for simplex and for discovery and new frontiers, and how do we blend all of those together in the right cadences for each of those that can fit within the budget that we have available. Let's see, some other questions. Here's a good question. The schedule for implementing Science Mission Directorate's strategic social media plan that will consolidate all existing profiles from its missions. Is S&D reaching out to all of the missions to get their feedback on this plan before implementation? So this is a really interesting question. It's probably not something that everyone is familiar with, but over the last couple of decades, as the way we communicate has evolved, first from traditional types of media through the internet and Facebook pages, and now through social media with Twitter and Instagram and other similar platforms, the way we communicate has changed. And it's in the past, NASA's kind of taken an organic approach where everyone has had their own individual accounts. And what we found is that to have the most impact in this environment, it's actually much more impactful to have large thematic accounts from which many of our missions or projects can communicate to the public through these larger thematic accounts. This is not something that Planetary Science or even Science Mission Directorate is doing independently. This is actually something that's agency-wide activity moving forward. So this is coming, and we are communicating with the teams to let them know this is happening. We're having, in fact, I have conversations, I believe, even this week with a couple of the teams to talk about how this is going to be implemented. But the intent is always to make sure that our information is reaching the broadest audience possible. We're trying to help, again, get that information out, get the science out, and engage as much of the public as we can. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see what else we have. Here's a question from the Planetary Society that I think is for all three of us. It says, all of us at the Planetary Society are happy to see that the Decadal Survey's focus includes astrobiology and planetary defense. It says, can Lori and the other panelists say more in this forum about how NASA is embracing this direction? So I'll just give a little bit first and then see if Steve or Jake would like to comment on any aspect of what went into the direction for Decadal Survey. As we went into developing the statement of task for the Decadal Survey, it was really important to me and to actually all of Planetary Science and to Thomas Zurbuchen as well, that we make sure that these key parts of our program, astrobiology and planetary defense, are included as part of the discussion for Decadal Survey. They're both critical parts of what the agency does and the parts of our portfolio within planetary science. And in thinking about astrobiology, there have been a couple of different ways to consider astrobiology in planetary science. And one is to think of it as a separate entity in and of itself and think about astrobiology and planetary science independently. But I think there's an enormous amount of value to think about astrobiology in a much broader sense, and even broader than just planetary science, but even across all of science at NASA. And so we felt it was really critically important that astrobiology be called out explicitly and that it be considered as part of the larger, broader questions within the planetary sciences division's purview. And the same goes for planetary defense. Planetary defense is a critical part of our program. It's a really essential function for our country and for the world, that we are coordinating and working with other partners to identify and characterize near-Earth objects and potentially hazardous asteroids, developing mitigation techniques for potential future asteroid threats. And this is something that I think Planetary Science Division is uniquely positioned to do this work. We have the science expertise within planetary science community, not only to understand the science of these bodies, but to understand their orbits, to understand their compositions, to understand their physical makeup. All of that information, we have the scientific expertise. We also have the engineering expertise to understand how you might go about designing and building and implementing a mission that could be launched in order to mitigate a potential threat. And so I think this is a really fundamental part of our program, not just the science, but the protecting and preserving life on Earth aspect of our charge at NASA. So to me, it was incredibly important, again, that planetary defense be included for the Decadal Survey's consideration. So I don't know if, Steve, you have anything you'd like to talk about, maybe in particular the emphasis that's called out for working with human exploration to understand how we can better enable science through human exploration. That is also, of course, called out in the Statement of Tasks.
Yeah, Laura, I think you did a great job really laying that out. And I don't have a whole lot more to add, but the key there is what you just pointed out is we continue to work very closely with our human exploration colleagues in both those areas. And certainly if we can leverage, for instance, future CLPS missions to help enable those communities to meet their objectives from a science standpoint, then we're certainly open to doing that. I can think on the planetary defense side, I know from a space situational awareness aspect, there is a lot of interest in potentially using CLPS to provide new vantage points for that space situational awareness. So we are in active talks now. And then on the astrobiology side, we've had some initial discussions, and Jake can probably amplify it too, with the folks in the space life sciences area. There seems to be some interest there to fly some future payloads on CLPS missions as well. And so we're actively exploring those options with our mission directorate colleagues. Jake, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can just echo everything that's been said so far. From our perspective, it's a great opportunity to have considerations wrapped into the Decadal. Steve mentioned using CLPS to provide unique new vantage points from which to make observations. I think we view the human exploration architecture the same way. And we need to work closely with SMD moving forward. The spacecraft that we're developing and will fly will provide those unique opportunities from which to make observations. For instance, the Gateway, enabling us to put out payloads from ESA to monitor space weather, as well as the heliophysics payload that SMD is going to fly. So I think having this relationship, we will look to your Decadal survey, we will look to the SMD community to tell us what are the important science observations that need to be made. And then our job is to make sure that we develop our architecture in a way that enables as much of that as we can accomplish.
Great, thank you. Thanks both. There were a couple follow-on questions, Steve and Jake, regarding the workshop. There was one question saying, where was the call for abstracts? Was it an email list or through Inspire? So I guess some people missed that. So just wondering where they should be looking. And then another one saying that they would have submitted an abstract, but the dates didn't work for them. But now that it may be postponed or virtual, they'd definitely be interested. So would you consider another opportunity for abstracts to be considered?
So I know Jake, I know from talking with Ben Bussey that numerous listservs that reached across all the communities was used, I think, from a really broad blast out for abstracts, and maybe you can provide some details there. On the second part of that question, certainly with the current environment, we do want to move forward, as Jake said, but we certainly can consider whether or not it would be of benefit to open it up another call for abstracts. But right now we just can't make that determination. We've got to see really how the abstracts we did receive, how we're going to put those in different categories and how we're going to move forward. But Jake, I'll turn it over to you, see if you got some additional information on both parts of that question.
Yeah, so for the workshop itself, we worked closely with the Lunar and Planetary Institute, as well as SERVI, Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute, to organize that. And I believe the initial announcement was organized by the LPI, and then it went out through a series of listservs that were basically the same listservs we used for the prior SMD HUMD joint workshop, which was a workshop on Gateway in early 2018, Science at the Gateway. So, prominently for the lunar community, that announcement was made out through the Lunar list serve. So I would say that if you missed the announcement, that you probably want to maybe look to one of those lists to monitor opportunities as they're coming forward. I know there were a few things I saw trickling out on social media as well. So if you didn't hear about it, we apologize for that, and but maybe try to monitor some of those. And thank you for the question about will there be an opportunity to submit additional abstracts. I hadn't really thought about that at this point, but again, I'll stress the point that we're moving very rapidly to try to meet the goals that have been presented to us, landing crew on the surface of the moon and exploration from lunar orbit. And so as we, we're kind of missing this physical opportunity for a meeting at the end of April. And as we look at opportunities to do some virtual activities there, maybe we need to explore opportunities to encourage additional abstract submissions. And again, by moving quickly, we know things change rapidly. So continuing to discuss the architecture with the community might result in different inputs were we to ask for abstracts. So again, thanks for that question. And I'll just reiterate that the organizing committee is going to be getting together over the next few weeks to discuss this, and we'll certainly take that input into consideration.
Great. Here's perhaps a quick one for you, Steve. Will PRISM have a website?
Having trouble finding the unmute button there. Yes, actually, we will, and that's in development right now. We're working within my office. Brad Bailey is leading that up, and so we will have a website for PRISM. I don't have a projected date, but yes, the answer is yes.
Good. Okay, here's a question that's nominally for me, but I may have to phone a friend on this one. It says, should we anticipate that selections for Mars 2020 participating scientists will be made before launch in July, or should we expect delays? And so I believe that that program is going forward, as scheduled. But I'm not exactly sure when the anticipated announcements are expected. So if Stephen Reinhardt or Michael Meyer are listening, or Mitch Schulte, maybe they can either text me or send a note to Doris and communicate to me so I can tell folks what to expect there. That would be helpful. So I'll try and get that. If I don't get that information, we will find it and try and communicate it out as we get it. That's a good question. As far as I know, things are on schedule. Steve, here's another one for you. You mentioned Trailblazer briefly, but didn't get back to it unless the listener missed it. So can you speak a little bit more about Lunar Trailblazer?
Yeah, and actually, I think in the development of these slides, and we were concerned about time, I think I had one slide in there, and in the final version, it's not. And so, as Lori knows, it's Trailblazer is going through phase AB right now, and we are in discussions with Lori that indeed, if they make it through the phase B decision point, then we will fund it in LDEP, and we're very excited about that project. We see great benefit to do more with smaller platforms. And this was one of the ones that, as Lori mentioned in her part of the talk, that was came through Simplex. We certainly look forward to additional proposals that could come through Simplex that focuses on lunar, because we'd be very excited about looking at those as well. But Trailblazer is moving through the phase AB study phases. They're doing very well. And so later this year, we look forward to evaluating whether or not they'll go into the confirmation at PDR. So unless there are some further questions on that, that's really the gist of where they're at right now.
Cool. Yeah, we're all excited about Lunar Trailblazer, and I was really excited that that Steve and his group were also interested in Trailblazer. So the fact that we have multiple groups and organizations at headquarters interested in our simplexes has allowed us to actually expand our phase AB portfolio to give ourselves the best position for success, hopefully in simplex. Let's see. Here's a really interesting question. Says, would NASA consider transferring or selling Odyssey to another governmental agency, a private company or nonprofit, etc.? And that's an interesting question that I will have to to give people a call back on that one, I would have to go back and do a little bit of research on legalities to understand what the possibilities might be. I honestly hadn't thought of that question before, so we'll have to. I can go back and do a little research and see what practicalities are there. It might be interesting to know what exactly one person might have in mind with that question. And with that, I don't see any other questions at the moment. Remember, if you have questions, please email them to Doris Dow, doris.dow@nasa.gov, doris.daou@nasa.gov. If you've got any more questions, and she can submit those. I think I've answered all of the ones that have come in, that Steve or Jake or I have answered them all. While we're giving people a moment to see if they want to send another question, I just want to take a moment again to thank LPI for hosting this event. We couldn't have done it without them. And for the person who asked the question about the Mars 2020 participating scientist program, I got an answer back on that one. Had we been at LPSC on the floor, I would have just handed the microphone over to Michael to answer this question, since he's the knowledgeable one on this topic. He says the review is scheduled on time. For the short term, all reviews will be done remotely, so it will happen one way or another, is what he says. So the expectation is that, as I indicated earlier, all of our proposal review panels have gone virtual. We may have to take a couple extra days and run them a little differently than we normally do on a face-to-face panel, but the expectation is we're going to try to keep things on schedule as best as we can. Okay. Here's a comment from someone that was submitted saying, we missed the tension in the room of the usual LPSC NASA headquarters briefing. Yes, me too. I definitely missed that. Maybe not. No, this has been nice. Anyway, this was someone making a comment. It's nice to say that it's refreshing to watch public servants engage so directly. And so we will stay safe. You stay safe as well, all of you. Okay, here we go. I did get a little bit of an answer back on the spacecraft, and was told that a prior attempt to transfer a spacecraft over to another entity was told by the lawyers that it couldn't be done, but that doesn't mean we won't ask the question again. And then there's a question about PSD. Why does PSD conduct senior reviews of ongoing missions when the results are ignored in budget decisions? I think that's a fairly abrupt question, but the point is, whenever we do our senior reviews, we are looking for trying to best understand what the scientific return is from those missions, and the senior review provides that. But there's also always the additional consideration, which is funding availability. And so, we're working really hard to budget balance the budget that we have. And sometimes tough decisions need to be made. As I said earlier, we're trying to, as best we can, adhere to the recommendations. The highest ranking missions are receiving funding and going forward, and we hope to keep all of the operating missions going as best we can. Let's see. Here's another question. Will the success of the 3 currently selected simplex missions have any effect on the number selected for the next round of simplex? And the answer to that is yes, because we have 1 simplex line and it has a fixed amount of funding in it. That being said, as I indicated earlier, we're really pleased that there are other organizations that were interested in the 3 simplexes that were successful, that went on to phase A-B. And as Steve indicated, Lunar Trailblazer, if they are successful in reaching their phase C, their confirmation, the Lunar Discovery Exploration Program is going to take Lunar Trailblazer on, take over the funding for that one, which again would not be funded out of the simplex line. And likewise, Escapade, we have a lot of interest from the heliophysics division. So there is a potential, if Escapade does well and makes it into phase C, past confirmation, there's a potential that that one may be funded outside of the simplex line as well. So yes, there is, they are correlated. There is a fixed amount of funding in the simplex line, so we can only support so much there. But as I said, I think there are opportunities to really make sure that these interesting missions have a way forward if they demonstrate their capability to fit within the cap. And then hopefully, again, we have the ability to offer another round to bring in some additional concepts. Let's see, here's another question. Want to ask, is there any special mission to filter lunar dust? And I don't know if that one's for Steve or Jake.
Well, I can at least say from Hugh's perspective that there are a number of thoughts and aspects of how we're thinking about dust right now. It certainly is a topic that we discuss, and how and if it may be transferred from the human lander to the Gateway, to Orion. How do we need to filter it? How do we monitor it? Those are open topics of discussion. I will bring up our partnership with STMD with respect to any kinds of tasks that we can conduct now with simulants to study regolith and how it will affect the systems that we're developing. As for specific missions to land on the surface and conduct some form of filtering of the regolith, I don't know of anything currently on the books. I know that we are looking at how regolith reacts to landers, to the rockets and everything like that, to assess how we need to space landings, how far away do we need to be from already deployed payloads, topics like that. So there are a number of things in consideration and ways that we're thinking about studying regolith moving forward. And I don't know, Steve, if you have anything else to add to that.
I don't have the specifics, but we do have one of the LCIT-P instruments that's focusing on the regolith and dust environment that we're going to be flying on one of the deliveries in 2022. So I don't have the information handy to look up the aspects of that particular instrument, but yeah, we are going to have some initial data in the 2022 timeframe when we deliver, or when our CLPS provider delivers for us, I should say.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you both. Here's another interesting question. If a private company were to launch a space-based solar system telescope, would SMD be potentially interested in data buys for RNA? And that is a really great question. We're really looking at a variety of different types of partnerships and ways to work with the commercial community in a variety of different ways. The CLPS is one approach that we're taking, where we're buying services from these commercial providers for landers to the surface of the moon. But in earth science, they're already experimenting with these types of data buy types. And so this is certainly something that is interesting to pursue. We're watching very closely to see how the data buy activity in earth science is going, to make sure we learn some lessons from there to understand how we can potentially participate in similar types of things for planetary science. It's interesting to hear that there are commercial interests in flying some planetary missions for telescopes, or I've heard other ideas for other commercial ventures that may be able to provide services or data to planetary science. And we're interested in doing the science. And so if there's a good mechanism out there that can help provide additional data for doing science, we're interested. We just need to work through whatever's the right mechanism to do that. Thanks for that question. That was good. Here's another good question. Any word on whether the New Frontiers target list will come out of the Decadal or CAPS? I've mentioned this a couple of times in talks, but I'm not sure how widely it's been disseminated. But the CAPS, which is our National Academy's committee, the Standing Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science, has been tasked specifically to look at the list of New Frontiers targets. And they have a meeting coming up the end of this month, March 31st and I think April 1st and 2nd. It has just been transitioned to be a virtual meeting, but there should be information out there if people want to dial in and listen. And what they're going to be focused on in that discussion is primarily looking at, for example, the Trojan Tour. I've gotten lots of questions. Is Trojan Tour going to be offered? We have a mission in discovery, which is meeting many of the objectives, if not all of those objectives of Trojan Tour. So should that one still be included? Also looking at Ocean Worlds and thinking about the last time when that was offered. Number one, Ocean Worlds was something that at the time it was put into New Frontiers, CAPS didn't have the ability to provide a recommendation back. They now have the ability to do letter reports on these type of questions. So allow them to look at Ocean Worlds and understand whether, now that Dragonfly has been selected, to provide some input regarding whether or not Ocean Worlds that has been satisfied, or whether Enceladus should remain in the list, or the Ocean Worlds topic in general. And they've not been asked to add any new targets, so don't worry about them adding new targets. We are asking them to look at those that are there. We've also asked them to just reaffirm that the Io Volcano Observatory and Lunar Geophysical Network should be added as recommended by the original decadal survey. So they are definitely tasked to look at this, and we expect to have some good guidance and recommendations coming out of CAPS at the end of this month that will help us formulate what that next New Frontiers call is going to look like. Let's see, there was a question. Please repeat where the slides are going to be posted, and that is the solar system website, science.nasa.gov/solar-system/documents. And then there's a question about will there be a video posted of this town hall, and that will be a question for Myra if she wants to send me the information on whether or not that's going to be available. She's supporting this this town hall, so hopefully I'll get some information from her on what may or may not be available following. And let's see, here's a question. I heard that the cost cap for the next Simplex missions will remain at 55. May have missed an announcement. So there hasn't been an announcement, but I did mention a little while ago that the expectation is that the cost cap for Simplex, there's no expectation it's going to change, and last time it was $55 million. At this point, there's no intention to change that. And let's see, do you expect the current COVID-19 pandemic to affect the schedule for the Simplex AO release or other upcoming ongoing opportunities? For example, Discovery Phase A, New Frontiers 5 AO, etc. Ideally, what is the current target for release of the Simplex AO? As I mentioned earlier, we are looking to make sure we are gathering as much lessons learned as we can from the current set of Simplex. Right now, the no earlier than date for Simplex is September of 2020. At this point, I don't see COVID-19 being a primary driver of when that AO comes out. I think it's more making sure that we have everything lined up as far as understanding what's going on with the current set of Simplex, and understanding the budget going forward is going to be the primary driver for when that AO comes out, and understanding what the opportunities are for ride shares, if there are additional ride share opportunities that we can offer. So we're trying to assess all of those things right now, and those are bigger drivers than COVID-19 right now as far as Simplex. As regarding the Discovery Phase A's, we are trying to make sure we assess what the impacts are on all the teams across all of the activities that we have going on. Right now, all of our activities at the NASA centers are being done almost exclusively through virtual means. Most everyone is teleworking. That may or may not, depending on the duration of this impact, may or may not drive a need for some kind of adjustment to the Phase A studies. For right now, we're looking at the near-term impacts things like our review panels and potential ROSES deadlines that are coming up over the next month or two. Right now, the concept study reports are due right around Thanksgiving. And at this point, we haven't addressed that yet, but we will continue to keep an eye on how those teams are doing. Let's see. Here's a question. STMD is planning on having a funded program called Luster, Lunar Surface Technology Research, coming out in June timeframe. How can the science community find out about this one? Maybe that's Steve.
Yeah, so we work closely with STMD, and we will ensure that all of the science communities are aware of that through the various contact points, the listservs and so forth like that. So yes, we'll definitely make sure that there is a broad notification for that particular call.
Great. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions right now. So maybe we should begin to wrap this up. Again, I wanted to thank both Steve and Jake for being here with me today. It's important that we're all working this together. Not just the planetary science and the importance of Moon to Mars and our collaborations with human exploration, but we're all working together, trying to do everything virtually. So we thank everybody for your patience and for your remote participation today. And again, thanks to LPI for their support. We appreciate it. And I think with that, I think we're going to wind it up. Thank you very much. And for Steve and Jake, why don't we just hold for a moment until we get the all clear. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Lori.
Hello, everyone. And yes, I do need to clean my electronic desktop. That concludes our live coverage of the NASA Town Hall for the Planetary Science Division. But that doesn't conclude our streaming for the day. In just a few minutes, we are going to be joined by Dr. Paul Byrne, who's going to talk to us about his research on Venetian rocks. That will be followed by a second presentation on just how recently is it that Venus went from potentially habitable to, well, the rather deadly world that we see today. Now, I am going to take a brief break because it turns out the room of the house that I'm in is far colder than I would like it to be. So I'm going to go grab a jacket and some hot coffee, and I will be back in just a few moments, and we can talk about what we just watched while we wait to be joined by Dr. Paul Byrne. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back.